This happened about 10 months ago. I was spending a few days with my best friend from college, Chris, in his hometown. It was a really small town compared to what I was used to, but Chris showed me around, and we went to the bars and hung out, having a good time. On my last night there, he mentioned a place he wanted to explore for a while but hadn't had anyone to go with. It was an abandoned house or town a few miles out in the woods. We used to explore and backpack all the time in college, so it sounded fun. Only 30 minutes after hearing about it, we were already trekking through a path in the woods. We still had some sunlight left, but brought headlamps just in case. After about 20 minutes of walking, the trail ended, and we had to follow a faint footpath through the trees. It took another hour before we made it. We could see a house in the distance, and as we got closer, we saw several more behind it. It wasn't what we expected. The houses didn't look that old. They looked weathered and damaged, but had modern siding and stuff like that. There was even a tiny gravel road leading from each of the homes. It seemed like they were trying to build a community, and something went wrong, causing them to abandon it. Other people had been there before us, as evident by the graffiti on the sides of the houses. Chris and I went up to the first house. Looking through the open doorway, there were weeds growing through the floorboards, but it was otherwise empty. Before we stepped in, a loud slamming sound echoed through the woods. Both of us jumped and stared down the gravel road, thinking the sound came from there. After that sound, though, it was quiet. We had no idea what it was, but after seeing nothing, we went inside the house. There wasn't much to look at, but what made it interesting was trying to figure out why anyone would abandon it. The house looked like it would have been nice before it was left behind. After walking around the first floor, we went upstairs. Oddly, it got much darker upstairs, like no windows were letting in any light. The hallway was short, with only 2 doors and what looked like an attic in the ceiling. We went up to the first door and opened it, seeing another empty room, but we were quickly interrupted by hearing something downstairs. There were shuffling footsteps coming through the grass and up to the house we were in. We stayed quiet, but we were sure whoever they were had probably seen us outside. But why would they try to approach us? They walked up to the front doorway, then stopped just before entering. Hello, we didn't respond. I just want to talk. No harm at all, he sounded older, and almost like he was missing teeth or something, stumbling over his words. After that, there was a whole minute of silence. He didn't say anything else, but we didn't hear him leave either. We waited a few more minutes, still not hearing anything, before Chris quietly went down the staircase and looked over at the front door. He turned and looked back at me with a pale face. There's nobody there. I quickly went to see for myself, but he wasn't lying. He was nowhere in the doorway. We carefully made our way down and over to the doorway, looking out. There was one line of footprints in the grass coming from where the other houses were, but no footprints leaving. Both of us figured it out at the same time and bolted for the trees, knowing the guy must have been hiding inside the house. Somehow we got out of the woods as fast as we could and went back to his place. Who that guy was, and why he wanted to talk to us, we don't know. I'm sure if he'd found us, though, we probably wouldn't be here. I was driving across the country for a hectic trip. I had some work to do at an office in Maine and decided to visit some friends and family on the East Coast. On my 4th day of driving, I spent most of the day going through Pennsylvania. There were cool towns, but most of the drive was through nothing. The route took me on long, empty one-lane highways. As it got late, rain started coming down, and my fuel was running low. I hadn't seen any gas stations in a while, so I hoped one would show up soon. But the road wasn't going through any towns. After driving in the rain for another 30 minutes, I saw a sign for a gas station through the fog. A moment later, it appeared ahead of me. It was off the side of the road, nestled in the trees, and was really small. It only had 2 pumps and a tiny concession building behind it. Having no other choice, I pulled in and parked, getting out and opening my gas tank. When I pulled the pump off and tried to insert my card, it didn't work. I wiped the dusty screen and tried to see what it was saying, but it didn't say anything. It wasn't even on. I then went over to the only other pump, and it was also off. Frustrated, I looked around. With it raining and being well past sunset, it was hard to make anything out. The place looked old and outdated, but so did a lot of other gas stations. After a closer look, I noticed a small light inside the concession building. Hoping it was a worker that could help me, I stepped out from under the overhang covering the pumps and ran up to the door. Moisture covered the entire glass door, so I couldn't see inside. All I could see was the light reflecting through the glass. I grabbed the handle and it screeched open. When I stepped inside, I immediately knew something was wrong. The store shelves were empty, some even knocked over, and the place just looked destroyed. The light was coming from somewhere in the back and was clearly some sort of lamp, not a regular store light. I was only in there for a few seconds, and after seeing all that, I quickly stepped back outside. I didn't know what was going on in there, but I knew it couldn't be good and definitely not helpful for my situation. As I backed out of the store and into the rain, I turned toward my car, but a person was standing next to it. They were completely drenched in water and were just looking around my car and into the windows. "Hey, what are you doing?" I yelled as I quickly made my way up to them. They shot a look at me, then moved their eyes behind me. I turned back to look at the building. The front door was open, and a man came out into the rain. He had long black hair and a sickly look. He didn't waste any time and instantly started running at me. The person by my car just backed away as I got inside, but the man running didn't slow down. He came right up to my door and tried opening it, and as I pulled away, a loud metallic scrape vibrated through the car. I sped out of there and back onto the road, making it another half hour before my car ran out of gas. Luckily, I had cell service and was able to get help. While I waited, I looked at the outside of my car and saw a huge line going across the door. It looked like the man had run a knife along it when I drove away. The police informed me later that night that the gas station I was at had not been in service for at least a decade. Other than that, nothing else came of it, and what would have happened if I didn't get out in time is left to nothing but theories. I live in the Midwest, where there are many abandoned places nearby. I was in my last year of high school, and my friends and I often visited these creepy places for fun. It was a pretty normal thing that kids around here did. This was on Memorial Day weekend, so we had 3 days off school. With the year coming to a close, we decided to explore a place we'd been wanting to visit for a while. It was a ghost town called Cairo, though it isn't completely deserted because some people still live there. Cairo was built in the late 1800s, but due to flooding and racial conflicts, it slowly lost its population. For almost 50 years, most of the town has been empty and left to decay. Hearing stories from others who had been there made us excited to see it for ourselves. On Sunday around 6, my friend Tristan picked up Ryan and me, and we drove 2 hours south to Cairo. Most of the drive was through huge farmlands and fields with few towns or cities nearby. When we got onto the road going through Cairo, it was the eeriest feeling I'd ever had. There were faint lights far down the road from a few residence houses, but everything in between was pitch black and abandoned. We parked next to an old brick building that said liquor on it and got out of the car. We stood there for a minute, not really saying anything and just listening. The wind was blowing, making the metal and wood creak all around the buildings, but other than that, it was completely silent. Ryan led the way as we walked down the road, looking around. On the left side were small wooden homes swallowed by vines and bushes, and on the right side was a line of old shops. As we got toward the middle, one building stood out. There was a sign sticking out from the brick that said Gem. It looked like an old theater, with a ticket booth next to the entrance. We all agreed to check it out, so we pulled out our flashlights and entered through one of the windows. It was really dark inside, and our flashlights were pretty terrible, lighting up only a couple of feet ahead. The main room was very dusty and had an awful odor, like rotting wood or mold. The floor was covered in debris. As we looked around, Ryan suddenly told us to stop. Tristan and I immediately stopped moving and talking and just stared at Ryan. He looked like he had heard something, so we all stood in silence and listened for any noises. After a minute, Ryan said he swore he heard something above us. He said it sounded like a single footstep, but Tristan and I didn't hear it and thought it was probably just the building creaking. We looked around some more before going through the only other doorway, which led up some stairs to a second floor. This floor was where all the seats were. There were about 50 chairs leading up to a balcony where the stage was on the floor below. We started walking down the row of steps through the chairs when a small creak from behind us made us all turn around. In the corner, a man was standing between the wall and one of the chairs. He looked disheveled and homeless, and he was staring right at us while holding up one of his arms. In his hand was a small revolver, and he was pointing it directly at me. It was still silent in the building to the point where I could literally hear my heart beating. Tristan ran back down the stairs, leaving just me and Ryan. We tried to stay calm and told him we were just going to leave, but the man didn't speak or move. So we carefully started walking back to the stairs, and as soon as we were out of sight, we booked it out of the theater and back to the car. We drove away and spent the next hour in silence, soaking in what happened. My guess is that the man used to live in the community, but as it fell apart, he got caught up in the mess and was forced to hide and live in one of the abandoned buildings. There were many ways that situation could have ended badly, and all of us getting out unharmed was unlikely. We haven't tested our luck at any other places since then.